Can't float a bar. Who's on the phone?
Magnan, Stuber, Healy.
Okay.
But she's, she's in good shape. Her mind is sharp as a tack.
That's important.
Yeah.
So the worst thing is when the mind starts going and memory starts
Well,
getting.
what I said to her,
No, her mind is sharp as a tack. Physically,
We'll call the
same
Public
deal that they
Works
have.
meeting to order. NBC regular meeting, Public Works, Wednesday, June 26, 4 p.m. The public comments. No public comments at this time. Very good, thank you. Item number 3, approval of minutes. Need a motion, please?
Adoption.
Thank you. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Any abstentions? Very good. Number 4, we have 3 items regarding encroachments. And what I'd like to do is to propose that we take all of these together. We can vote for them individually. I don't think that's necessary, but nevertheless, we do have staff here to explain each of them. So with that,
Mike Curley.
Move adoption.
Mike Curley.
Yes.
Okay, Mike.
Hello. Good.
You're on.
Mike Curley, Manager of Engineering. The first item the first request is the Clover Street Park Windsor encroachment request. In April 19, 2024, we received a request from the town of Windsor through their engineer BSC Group to encroach upon our 20-foot wide Deckers Brook sewer easement encompassing a 15-inch trunk sewer for the purposes of constructing and installing site improvements for the Clover Street Park revitalization project. Now, the majority of this revitalization will be the construction of a cricket field. And as you can see from the map, our sewer line runs right through the middle of it. So it's kind of unavoidable. So what they're planning to do is just strip it down. They're going to be filling up to 2 feet. They're also going to be installing an under drain system, which is no problem for us. We find these in a lot of parks. And they're also putting in new storm drainage and driveway and parking areas, and that's about it. So even though the work is extensive, it's not going to be we consider it minor in terms of impacts to the sewer. And as long as they follow the 7 stipulations listed in this resolution, we'll have the ability to be there and anticipate any issues if they come up. So if there's any questions.
Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah, this is for all 3. I take it that we're going to, as we normally do, have our standard 7
Yes.
stipulations.
It's a boilerplate.
Exactly. That's standard boilerplate for
Yes.
everyone here.
Yes.
That's just so, in effect, even though they have an easement, there are certain protections that you guys have built in and that you always do
Correct.
protect us.
Correct. During construction, yes.
Further questions? Seeing none? No, if that was.
No, should we
Raising a hand?
Do the next one. Vote on them all at once.
We'll go to the next one.
So we can actually take that vote if you want to, someone wants to move this item forward.
Move
moved.
adoption.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition?
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposition?
That we're taking them all.
Hearing none, unanimous. Item number 5.
Yes. Item number 5.
Thank you.
In July 20th, 2023, Greg Robertson, the owner of the property, has submitted a request to encroach upon our 20-foot wide sewer easement that contains an 8-inch PVC sewer line that serves his properties. He's asking permission from us to have Eversource Gas install a service line. They're also going to be, as part of this work, going to be requesting an easement for themselves. So we find this kind of common whenever, Eversource, especially if the line is going to serve more than one person or one property owner, it's a public line, and they usually require an easement to have access to it. Generally, the line is only a 3/4 inch line. They're going to be able to maintain plenty of clearance, 2.5 feet from our sewer line, even though it's not very deep. But their easement's going to be about a 15-foot wide easement. Generally, we consider this kind of work, since they're only going to be 30 inches deep, and our sewer line's about 5 to 6, we consider this a minor impact to our easement as well as the sewer. Again, these stipulations, in this regard, we only have 4 provisions or stipulations that they need to abide by for this particular project. If there's any questions.
Yes, Commissioner Gale.
Yeah, thank you. Just to confirm, this project, like the last one, I take it that nobody's interfering with the sewer at all.
Correct.
The whole idea is that everything that they do is supposed to not touch the sewer, not disturb it, not break it, not do anything.
In some cases, they do have to make a connection to the sewer, but not in this case. But, we don't consider those encroachments. Those would be like normal connection projects, activities. But yeah, generally, they're all around. They generally have to fill to allow utilities to cross, and they're well above our sewer.
Thank you.
Oh, Torres. Commissioner Torres?
Yeah, just kind of a general question. When we do these encroachment agreements, I would imagine that we have some kind of monitoring process. What is a protocol for that? How do we make sure that they, do what they're supposed to be doing?
Yep, good question. Good question. So part of these stipulations that are listed here, they're going to be required to have a construction inspector on site. That'll be paid for by the owner, and he's going to have complete authority to shut them down if, for any reason, they're not following their plan that we reviewed, that would be referenced in the encroachment agreement, or if they see anything that would endanger the facility, sewer or water.
An MDC inspector.
MDC inspector. Yeah, it
Yeah,
could be a
our
consultant.
staff.
That was my next
Yes.
question. Who
Yeah, it's our
appoints this
staff.
person?
Correct.
Okay, one of our folks.
Yes,
They have to
correct,
reimburse us.
Yes.
Thank you.
correct.
Further questions, commissioners? Questions from the phone? None? So if someone wants to move this
Move
forward?
adoption.
Second.
I thought we
Second.
Oh, that was number 5. Sorry.
Second.
Second, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Unanimous. Thank you. Number 6.
Number
Seven.
6. Number 6 was received January 25th, 2024, on behalf of Stack and Store Weathersfield LLC. They're building a self-storage facility and in Weathersfield, and they're going to be, as part of the construction requiring to service the facility, they're going to have to build a driveway and put in other utilities, gas utilities, which are all listed here, drainage, and they're going to have to fill quite a bit. So in this case here, they're going to be filling anywhere between 3 and 11 feet. So this is not the usual circumstance, but required in this case. But it's not going to be an issue for us, again, because in that particular area, the sewer line is shallow to begin with. So what they generally do is they fill first to protect the sewer, and then they put all the construction above it. Again, we're also requesting that they follow the 7 templated provisions that we have listed here, and we do recommend doing an encroachment agreement with them, like in the other cases. Is there any questions?
Second.
Any questions before that? I didn't think so. Thank you. The item's been moved, seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 7. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank
Item number 7. This, I'm going to turn to Scott.
Yes, thank you. So we don't have a lot to update the committee on. I did mention this this topic at the June board meeting. And as you know, we've been mandated by EPA, Boston and EPA DC headquarters for the MDC and the City of Hartford to work together to develop an MOU outlining roles and responsibilities under the permit of the MS4 permit, which was issued by DEEP in 2017. So we had Chris Stone, myself, our staff, Susan, Chris Levesque, Mike Curley, a number of our staff were there. And we basically spent 2 days negotiating with our mediator, which is Daniel Dozier out of DC. He is actually an attorney, very well versed in the environmental legal realm. That's what he did. That's what he did for his career. He's retired, but we had a very very productive, long 2 days of meetings, and we're just going back and forth between the city and ourselves and the mediator to kind of finalize everything that was discussed and agreed to at the 2-day sessions. There's some issues that were agreed to, but yet everyone wanted a chance to kind of vet it internally amongst themselves. So we're hoping that in the next couple of weeks, we have a resolution to the negotiations, and we can move forward. And so this is what will happen is the MDC will be required. Right now, the only one permitted to do the MS4 is the City of Hartford. We have said since 2017 we should have been a co-applicant. The EPA agrees that we should be a co-applicant. So we will most likely have our own registration, which you would refer to as a permit, but it's paperwork, but it's a registration. And we will have to do our own documents, our stormwater management plan, and then together, all the city's plan, our plan will be memorialized under an MOU about who's actually doing what to make sure that the both of us meet the mandates and requirements of the MS4 permit. So that's really all I have to say. I don't know, Chris, if you got anything else?
Chris Stone, District Council, you summarized it well. And the important part here is that based upon the system in the City of Hartford, there has to be some level of cooperation between us and the city and to make it work and to come into compliance with the MS4 rules. So we're working towards that end. We're a lot farther along now than we were, say, 6 to 9 months ago. And that's in large part because of the openness of the staff from the city, the willingness of our staff to work with the city, and as important through all this, the independent third-party mediator that's really brought us together to work something out. So we anticipate going back with the mediator sometime in September, and that's because of his schedule. He's got other mediations now and then, but in September, and hopefully have a resolution that we can report back to you and for you to consider an MOU that encompasses all that needs to be addressed sometime in October, November of this year.
Commissioner Torres.
Commissioner Torres, once the MOU is completed and signed off on, in the event of any conflict of interpretation of that MOU, how would that, is there language that is included as to how that would be resolved?
Yeah, and that's a great point. Chris Stone, again, that's a great point. And one of the reasons why we spent 2 days on language is to make sure that it's clear enough, unambiguous enough, so that both sides have a clear directive of what their responsibilities are. So I'll give you an example. There was some language in earlier drafts that spoke to one party being primarily responsible for something. That's a little vague, right? Because if someone's primarily responsible, does that mean that the other party is secondarily? It's got to be more defined. You're responsible to do X, we're responsible to do Y. There shouldn't be any need for an overlap, and we've made that. So that's one point of several that we made clear needs to provide more clarity, more definitiveness than this had otherwise provided. So the other good thing about this mediation is not only are we participating and the mediator participating, but EPA and DEEP are there. They're in the room, the regulators. So whatever we discuss, if there's any clarity that needs to be offered on what the regulations say or mean, they're there in real time to point us in the right direction. So that's helpful.
Just one other question. Is there any participation or at any point, or was the Flood Commission at any point included in any of this? Do they have any role?
Well, if I may,
Well, the short answer is no, but go ahead.
yeah, well, I would just say that Scott Jellison, the Flood Commission is not party to this agreement. However, the chief engineer, which is Frank De La Ripa, who represents he is the executive director or director of the Flood Commission. So they're represented in the sense of, the chief engineer of the city of Hartford's there. But it's not, we did talk a lot about, the North Branch of the Park River. And because this is not an isolated topic, right? MS4 is more about water quality being discharged to the water bodies of the United States, right? And it's about illicit discharges getting into the storm system, meaning sewer or some kind of contaminated waste getting into the storm system that's going to river. That's what it's all about. But you can't have that conversation without talking about street flooding, sewer backups, river backups. So it was a very overwhelming discussion about a lot of things that wasn't just specifically about MS4. Talked a lot about development, and the importance of having clear, strict guidelines for all of us to follow when it comes to development, because development is what can create that illicit discharge. So it was a very good meeting, very good 2 days, and I think as Chris said, we're very much farther along than we've been in a long time, and hopefully we'll have a resolution here in the fall.
And if I might, one last part of that, in answer to your question, is there was a recognition that what happens in Hartford is affected by what happens outside of Hartford, right? So whether it's flows from West Hartford, Newington, Weathersfield, all those towns that are part of the Flood Commission, right? So we left in language that provides the flexibility for either side, the MDC or the city of Hartford, to work cooperatively with those who are contributing externally to Hartford's issues on the MS4, to work with them to address issues that they need to address in their towns because it affects the city of Hartford. We're not going to get there in this MS4 discussion. It's a much broader discussion on stormwater authorities and alike, but at least there's a recognition that it's not all, the problems aren't all generated within the city of Hartford, that there's contributions elsewhere.
Yeah, we know.
And I'm sorry, and that's somewhere in the language, or the recognition?
There's a recognition and the flexibility to negotiate intergovernmental MOUs to address those types of issues. There's no clear directive. I think that's down the road, Commissioner, quite frankly. MS4 is not going away for everybody. We're trying to address it for us in the city of Hartford, but it's going to reach our other member towns as well.
And to add to that, Scott Jellison, this also involves DOT, right? So anybody who discharges stormwater some way, somehow into the storm system in Hartford, and that includes DOT, has a responsibility, not to us, but to DEEP. DEEP regulates them as well. So, but this language Chris is referring to gives us that ability to, bring that entity, whoever that might be, another member town or another town or DOT to the table.
Who's going to be the enforcement authority? DEEP?
DEEP, yeah, so.
Because they represent EPA, so I would.
Yeah,
assume-
DEEP, this permit, to be frank, this permit is a permit that, a delegated state of Connecticut is responsible to enforce. Unfortunately, they haven't enforced it, and so that's why EPA is at the table. And this all really originated from all of the issues that are associated with the August 19th, 2021 storm. So this is really EPA enforcing their will onto a state agency, DEEP, that hasn't really exercised their responsibilities in enforcing the MS4 permitting process. So, it was, everybody was willing to roll up their sleeves, and we spent a good, 7-8 hours in those 2 days just working through the issues in a lot of detail and a lot of policy-related issues. So we're hopeful that we'll get a resolution here quickly.
Scott, what was the opinion of EPA relative to federal funding to participate in that process with the city?
Yeah, we Scott Jellison, we didn't talk about funding in terms of, the MS4, or you might be referring to the North Branch of the Park River. We talked about, in terms
That's
of.
only a part of it.
Yeah, we talked about, the funding for this mediation is being paid for by EPA. I have no idea how those terms are working. But EPA clearly had opinions in the meeting, so they spoke up. They weren't quiet, and it was helpful because what we don't want to do is we've been basically arguing the facts or the policy or the regulations for years with DEEP and with City of Hartford, and EPA brought clarity to those issues at the table. And what we want to make sure is that this MOU is clear. There's no ambiguity. We don't want to fight about this 3 years from now about who's supposed to be doing it. I want to be very, very clear who's responsible to do what. And so, it will get resolved. There's no doubt about it. And I think it's going to be good for the MDC. It's going to be good for the city of Hartford, and it will be good for the residents of Hartford.
One other question.
Go ahead.
Let's assume we can't come to an agreement. Who then enforces it? The court?
It will get resolved. EPA is going to make sure it gets resolved. If MDC and the city cannot come to terms on the MOU, the MOU, EPA has said clearly, we don't care what the MOU says. The MOU is not important to EPA because that just determines who does what, right? EPA only cares that it gets done. So they don't care how you split the duties and who does what. But what they will do is they will basically just impose, okay, MDC, you do this, City of Hartford, you do this, and submit your documents to DEEP, and then that's what will happen. But the more important thing is, yeah, is to make sure that it's easier for the city and MDC to work together to make sure that we're, working together to comply.
So ultimately, it would be a court enforced.
Correct.
Whatever EPA said.
Correct.
Or didn't say would be in some kind of a court, and we'd have the consent orders.
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah, I guess my question in all of this is we're negotiating an MOU, but are there any policy issues that need to be considered or weighed or discussed, both within this body here, or more particularly at the board level? I mean, I don't know, but I would think that once you get a number of agencies and different governmental bodies bouncing around, do we need to take a careful look and to see where this falls in the scheme of things? I mean, are we going down the right road on this? I mean, I'm not trying to second guess anyone, but I just think that, have we taken a look at policy issues or concerns relative to this body that we should consider? Because once you've got that MOU, the game is pretty much structured. And once again, I'm not trying to second guess anyone, but I just want to at least have us think carefully about, are there any considerations policy-wise with regard to this body that we should either look at, or we should discuss, or we should hear from staff where their thinking is at this point in terms of conducting the MOU, so that we can see how this hangs within this framework. You know, or we may decide, okay, you know, we'll take the MOU as it is, but I just think that it would be prudent for us to at least look at that and think about that. I think, once again, we owe that to our constituents.
Do either you or council want to respond?
I mean, the MOU is coming back to this board and to the full board, so we're in no position to agree to things and bind the MDC without the consent of this body and the full board, so it's coming back. I will tell you that let me finish, please. The MOU and the criteria set forth in the MOU is set forth in the MS4 regulations, and they have assignment. There's a whole slew of different assignments, different things, different goals, mandates that have to be complied with, and this is as much a part of allocating who's responsible for what as it is determining what to do. The EPA and DEEP are telling us what has to be done. This is more of an allocation of who does what. But that being said, to the extent it affects policy, it's coming back to this board anyway. It's going to come back to the full board anyway, and it's not as if what we do at staff level is written in stone, so to speak. I mean, if you change it, we go back. But it's a process that you will certainly be involved with. At this point, it's too early to bring anything back to you. We hope to bring something back to you sometime in September, October of this year, and you'll have a full vetting of it. So,
And if I may, we did qualify those statements in our negotiations. All of whatever we negotiate, to Chris's point, has to be approved by our board. But again, to Chris's point, these are mandatory tasks that have to be performed under the permit. We don't have any choice. We have no say. The question becomes who does which task, period. And so.
You're saying that the interpretation is laid down by DEEP, though.
It's not interpretation. It says there's a permit that says you will do X, Y, Z. And our MOU simply takes all of those tasks that are outlined in the MS4 permit and assigns responsibilities. City will do this, MDC will do this. City and MDC will do this, but very specific, because we don't want to argue later about, well, it was vague and wasn't quite sure who was going to do that. And then to DEEP's point or EPA's point, they're going to come back and they're going to say, well, this wasn't done. And we don't really care that you guys have an MOU that you're pointing fingers at each other. We're just concerned that it wasn't done. So we were very conscious about that and making sure that that we were not assigned. If there's a task that the city of Hartford agrees to do and we agree to do, and then one of us does not do that task, then it was very clear, and we made it very clear in our comments that we don't want to be, or the city shouldn't be penalized because the MDC didn't do its task or the city didn't do its task. So, but those are the kinds of things that we're talking about with the MOU, is really just assigning the tasks that are already outlined in the permit. Right now, MDC does not have a permit. We are not up the permittee. The city of Hartford is. And we're just rolling the MDC into this, even though we've been doing the testing and those kinds of things for years, and then giving that data, at least our data, to the city of Hartford. But this formalizes the responsibilities.
Commissioner Torres.
Thank you. All of these tasks must have a dollar attached to it.
Yes.
So as we negotiate this MOU, then does that, I would imagine then that there are going to be some of financial responsibilities that, you know, and
Yeah.
so are we going to then also be, you know, be tracking as we negotiate what those responsibilities are that will impact the budget that we have to put together to meet those operational requirements?
Yes, Scott Jelson. So I'm going to give you an example of that, your very question. Last year's budget, the MS4 permit, as you know, started in 2017. We've been in this discussion for years with DEEP in the city on who's doing what. And we've talked about cleaning the streets and the catch basins and all of the thing. And we have identified the MDC has had to clean the catch basins more often because the city wasn't cleaning the streets. Now the city's doing a great job cleaning the streets, but prior to that, they were not. So we had to add 2 additional staff and a new vac truck. So a vac truck's about $600,000, and 2 additional staff is $100 and something thousand a year with benefits. So yes, there are mandates that are going to be injected into our operational budget to do this, but we have to, right? And there are things like, for example, water treatment, right? So the MDC has 44 outfalls that go to the river, and we have to test 6 of those every year. So we do that, and pick a number. That's about $30,000-$40,000. We have a consultant do those testing and lab analysis and all this stuff, and that's required as part of the permit. The city of Hartford has 30. So they will have that same expense to whatever degree that is. And so we'll have expenses. The biggest problem with MS4 is not the execution of the MS4 permitting. The biggest problem with it is this is the next clean water project, right? If you can see the forest through the trees, this will be the next clean water project. 30 years from now, we'll be talking about treating stormwater. We'll be having treatment plants at these outfalls. That's what's coming. And if we don't do a good job in being proactive, stopping the garbage from getting to the catch basin before it leaches into the river, that's what's going to happen to communities. So it's really the long-term cost that's going to be that's going to hurt. One of the requirements, which is even DEEP agreed, it's a ridiculous requirement. It says you have to reduce the impervious area, and we showed that chart in our presentation, right? You have to reduce after the 4th year, so 2017, starting 2021, towns are supposed to reduce their impervious area 1% a year, blah, 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 blah. And we showed that chart, and we said, and I forgot the numbers, but I think Hartford was 66 acres or some number, was supposed to remove impervious parking lots from so that water can leach into the ground. It's impossible to do. DEEP even mentioned that they might try and rewrite that, and that's great. And if they do, that's wonderful. But it's regulation that's going to impact the long-term costs to the towns.
Got to return back to the 1890s.
Yeah. It will become expensive at some point. Yeah. Some towns are going to, Hartford and MDC are dealing with it right now, and then eventually it'll be one of our other towns, and and it'll be slow, but it might take 30 years. But it took 40 years for the MDC to spend $1.8 billion on the Clean Water Act. So it's coming. It just will take a long time.
That was to clean up to solve our problem. That was the theory.
Yeah.
Further questions? Further questions? We don't have to take any action on this.
No.
It's just a report. And thank you. That and questions as well. The opportunity for public comments. Hearing none. Once again, public comments. Otherwise, number 9, Commissioners' requests for agenda items going forward. Would there be any?
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Mandike.
you.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I'd just love to know when we're going to get an update on the North Branch for the report that CDM is actually doing, and I apologize if I,
It's on my notes.
on the notes that are supposed to look somewhere.
I would like to add.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I just put my note down for, so, it's not on the agenda, but it is a future agenda item. We did have a very good meeting. The report is not complete. We don't even have a draft of it, but we did have a very good presentation. Chairman Curry, myself, and staff met with the city staff yesterday in the green room? Yeah. Right, green room, next door. And we just talked through, the expectations of the report being completed and what those predictions look like and what we need to do and think about. So it was a very good report. The challenge that we have, the report was very good in outlining the city's responsibilities under the Hartford Flood Commission and the so-called street flooding or localized flooding around the basin, the inundation maps of the river itself. And then we also talked about what the MDC needs to do as part of its clean water projects and what we're going to need to do and decisions we need to make in terms of how do we discharge our now clean water to the river. So really, it's really simple in terms of you've got a couple of scenarios, right? If the river is not dredged, then, and the MDC would be forced to do its separation, to spend plus or minus $150 million extra for outfalls and pump stations to get the water into the river. And in that case, I've already been told by DEEP, and I've said this before, that that's a stormwater pump station, not a CSO pump station, not an outfall, and it's not regulated by DEEP. It's not regulated by EPA. So therefore, we most likely would not be able to use clean water monies for that. We wouldn't get grant money for it, and we wouldn't get loan for it, which means that $150 some odd million would need to be borne by our 8-member towns. Now you're talking about a pump station that's $100 million with an option to pump it, force pump down, to almost 2 miles to the Park River conduit. And so that infrastructure is well above our $25 million rule, and which means, and it's not part of the old $800 million and $800 million referendums. So we would need a referendum, and so that's a problem. The other issue is if we did that, and we pointed this out to the city, that you're going to be left holding the bag here with, we solved our problem, but now you still have this localized flooding problem throughout the region because CDM did a very good job and showed that there was a report done in 1959 that basically said they recommended that no development be built within the flood zone, the 100-year flood zone or the 500-year flood zone. And we showed, or they showed, CDM showed all of the areas that are being developed within that 100-year flood zone. So it's almost impossible to protect that development within that 100-year flood zone. You just can't do it. No matter how big the storm pipe is, you can't solve that, right? All of Mark Twain, all of Westbrook Village, and we also talked about the damming effect of the railroad that was built. At the time the railroad was built in the 30s, there were relatively no homes along Granby. Now the homes are along Granby. The drainage ditch behind the homes is 5 or 6 feet deep below the road. So you can only imagine water that's coming off of that large watershed. You saw pictures of sheds floating down the road, right? So that's where that water's going. So this report was, pretty telling to say that it's very clear that there's a flooding issue completely separate and distinct from MDC's CSO problem. And so we're going to have to decide. My recommendation to the city was to enact the Hartford Flood Commission and to call the towns that are members of that are contributing to the problem, Weathersfield, Newington, West Hartford, and Bloomfield, to bring them to the table to say, listen, I got a $50 million dredging problem, or I've got a $150 million problem that the MDCs have to pay for with Avalorum, and the city of Hartford has to pay 29% of it. And none of our towns have any say, right? We have to do it. Now, the referendum may not pass, but we'll just wind up with another consent order mandating us to do it. So the point is, if we do nothing and the river doesn't get dredged, you don't solve the problems that are occurring. You saw the pictures of a gentleman walking in water up to his waist up by Weaver High School. That had nothing to do with the MDC. It was reported that it was MDC's sewer system that was not large enough, but when you see these inundation maps and you see all the development that's within that 100-year flood zone, and you see that infrastructure that the city owns and leads under the railroad and to the river, you can see that water backing up through and into the streets of Hartford. So,
Scott, if I could, Commissioner Mundick, if I could just interrupt Mr. Chair for a second. I just wanted to know when the report was going to be done and when we will have a presentation on it. So I understand there's a lot of complexities right now, but it is my understanding that CDM was supposed to complete it at X amount of date. So I'm just wondering when the report's going to be done and when we'll see a presentation. I'm assuming they'll come to at least this committee to show us a report, and then at that point we'll have to figure out how we want to work with our respective towns on what way we go with this.
I apologize. I was trying
That's
to fill
okay.
time.
I'm just trying to
Fill time.
I'm just trying to look at dates.
The decisions that have to be made right now, the reason why we had this meeting is we have to decide, the city and the MDC have to decide on these critical issues before the report can get completed. So we can't present anything to you or to any of the towns until the decisions are made. Are we dredging the river? Or are the MDC going to go on its own and is going to put in its own outfalls and possible pump stations? So we don't have anything to report to until those decisions are made. Once those decisions are made, then they can finalize the report. So we're in a waiting pattern.
But it seems to me like, pardon me again, but it seems to me as the commission, we need to weigh in on that respective to the representation that we have here at the MDC to our towns, because this impacts our towns the way that we're going to potentially fund this one way or the other. So I understand the issue with the report, but it seems to me like we need to weigh in on this decision if we're talking about major dollars that the commission's going to need to eventually vote on. And it shouldn't just be, no offense intended, but with this level of a project, it shouldn't just be you and the city of Hartford making that decision that's going to impact all of our 8 of our towns.
I completely agree with the
Unless I'm
Commissioner.
not understanding
No,
something, and that way I
I
totally.
completely agree with you, except for one thing. The really is not our decision. The decision, the most important decision right now is not our decision. It's the city of Hartford's. The city of Hartford has to decide, and I think to give them, the opportunity to make that decision internally, they have to decide. It's not our decision. We're going to react to whatever they decide to do. So if they decide to dredge the river, then we can present, okay, here's what the MDC's options are. Here's what we're going to do. If they choose not to dredge the river, then we have the same discussion. But I agree with you 100%. But the only thing we could do is really present the information the engineers presented yesterday. But we don't have any recommendations to you because we're not holding the cards on this decision about who dredges the river. The city of Hartford has to decide, and I think that Chief of Staff James Wolf was there. He's going to be talking to the mayor. I think they need to have that internal conversation amongst themselves about what they're going to do and how they're going to proceed. I agree with you 100%.
And I just have one last question, I promise, Mr. Chair, on this, and I guess this is for Council Stone, and that is, are we sure on a legal basis that it is the city of Hartford's responsibility, sole responsibility, the North Branch of the Park River? Has that been determined in these discussions, that the North Branch is the city of Hartford's? Not our opinion, but is...
Oh, you're asking me for my opinion.
Yes, I guess I am, sorry. Is it the city of Hartford's or is the North Branch MDC's?
Not the MDCs,
It's not 100%.
not the MDCs,
It's the city of Hartford's
not the
responsibility.
MDCs.
So it was not in 1929 when we took over.
No. It's part of the City of Hartford flood control system. There are several water bodies within the City of Hartford that we contribute to with stormwater, but those water bodies are part of the City of Hartford.
That didn't come
flood
over in
control
1929?
No.
Okay,
No.
thank you, I appreciate that. Thank you for the information.
Further questions?
That's our,
Yeah,
she's asked, is that the city's opinion?
Well, no, I don't know what the city's opinion is.
Okay, so they haven't
my
expressed
opinion is
an
clearly,
opinion.
no, and they haven't, but by the same token, they've taken on, they understand their responsibilities regarding the North Branch of Park River. They have a decision to make, as Scott pointed out, they have a decision to make on what to do about their obligations with the North Branch of Park River. We are only one of many entities, areas that contribute to, that discharge into that otherwise public, city-owned water body known as North Branch of the Park River.
We also had some extensive discussions with Deep on that issue, and one of the things that we did do was for the lateral, the funding of laterals to get to a point they would, Scott, did they not say they'd be willing to participate?
If I may share,
Yes,
yeah,
go ahead.
early on in the discussions of North Hartford, there was some discussions from DEEP and from EPA that they might be able to somehow participate in the dredging of the river. But, as we move forward and farther into the process, they made it very clear that it's stormwater and therefore they can't fund any of it. And that's where the conversation came up about, if we had to put in, MDC had to put in a pump station, which we talked about yesterday, that would in fact be a stormwater pump station, and by rights should be part of the Flood Commission's responsibilities. But just to answer Commissioner Mandike's question, and I've already presented on this in the past, but there's a March 15th, 2016 report that was done by Fuss and O'Neill and GEI to the City of Hartford and clearly outlined all of the things, there's about $100 and some odd million worth of work that needs to be done on the Flood Commission assets. And in that report, it clearly outlines $3.5 million worth of improvements to the North Branch of the Park River. So this report, and again, I reported on this and we're happy to give you copies of it, clearly shows that this is, part of the Flood Commission asset. I agree wholeheartedly that the other towns and as we presented in our meeting, on the flood, stormwater management, issue, there's a reason why those 4 towns are part of the flood commission, a very good reason. So, that really needs to be, the flood commission needs to have a meeting, needs to hold a meeting and bring those 4 towns to the table and to say, you know, you got options, and those 4 towns are MDC towns. You can either pay your share of ad valorem for $150 million worth of work, or pay your share of $50 million worth of work to dredge. The sad part of this is, and I said this at the meeting yesterday, I've said it here, the $170 million that we're gonna spend in North Hartford will not solve this problem of flooding in North Hartford, will not solve it. And we cannot give the perception to the public that the $170 million is gonna solve the problem. Without dredging the river, you will still have significant flooding in the Weaver High School area because of the drainage area, because of, there's a 102-inch conduit that goes under the railroad, and it's, you know, it continues to fill up with debris that the city has cleaned it, but you have trees inside it, you know, and there's lots of damming, which we showed in the presentation that we've already seen. You've seen those pictures. So without a consistent maintenance program of the river, you're going to continue to have localized flooding. People on Scarborough, and if we have to pump our water into the river because the river's not dredged, it's only going to exacerbate the problem. It's going to make it worse. And we CDM presented yesterday that they think that if the river was dredged and it was maintained, you know, they could lower the elevation of the river by 2 feet, which would make a significant difference. So it's a really important decision for the city, and I know that they, you know, it's a challenge.
Chairman Curry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Curry, and Scott just touched on a bit on what I wanted to say in terms of, regardless of which direction Hartford decides to go in, the river's eventually going to have to be dredged anyway. But to put it in perspective, you know, we're talking $100 million for a pump station. Well, first $50 million for dredging, $100 million for a pump station, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but upwards of 2 miles of pipe at $4,000 a foot could approach another $100 million before you're done. So we're at $200 million. 29% of our ad valorem is paid for by Hartford. 29% of $200 million is $58 million. It's $8 million over the cost of dredging the river, which would eliminate those costs. It doesn't sound like it should be a difficult decision, just my opinion.
Thank you. Further questions? If not, looking for the magic word.
Right in a button, too. Right in a button. Move adjournment.
I was going to say we could talk between, but we can talk after.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Adjourned.
5 o'clock.